My own blood spent 6 weeks trying to force me out of the home my grandfather built with his hands, but the call that ended everything took less than 90 seconds. My name is Nora Blake. I was 35 the Tuesday my entire extended family decided I had stolen what was never theirs to begin with. My grandparents died on a clear September morning. A single-engine plane, a pilot who'd flown for 50 years, and a patch of unexpected fog outside Knoxville. I got the news from my older brother Derek. His first question wasn't about the funeral. It wasn't even, "Are you okay?" he asked. "Do you know if they had a will?" That was the moment I understood grief would have to wait. Something else was already moving. I just didn't know yet how organized it was. 9 days later, their attorney read the document aloud. 72 years old. A man named Mr. Ellsworth who'd known my grandfather since the Korean War. The family packed his office in dark clothes and held breaths. My father Richard sat in the front row with his arms locked. My mother, Diane, kept a tissue pressed to her nose that stayed perfectly dry. Derek bounced his knee like a piston. And my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, had already opened a legal pad before Mr. Ellsworth said a single word. I took the chair nearest the exit. Old habit. Then the reading began. I expected the lake property to go to my father. I expected the investment accounts to be split evenly. I expected maybe a mention of me at the bottom, a keepsake, a photo album, the clock in the hallway. Instead, Mr. Ellsworth said my name. He said it again a paragraph later. Then a third time. The room's temperature dropped 20 degrees. My mother stopped pretending to cry. My father uncrossed his arms slowly, like a man reaching for a weapon. Derek's leg froze mid-jiggle. "There must be a mistake," my mother said. Her voice had that surgical precision she used when she was most dangerous. Mr. Ellsworth didn't look up. "There is no mistake." He set down the paper and folded his weathered hands. "Nora is the sole heir. The entire estate passes to her." Then he gave the number, $37 million. The house on the lake, the undeveloped land on the North Shore, the brokerage accounts I never knew existed. And then he added something that made my blood run cold in a completely different way. "There is also a letter," Mr. Ellsworth said. "Handwritten, from your grandmother. She asked that you read it alone, when you were ready." Behind me, I heard my mother and Aunt Patricia whispering in that fast, venomous rhythm they reserved for emergencies. My father stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without looking at me. The door clicked shut like a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't finished reading. I nodded at Mr. Ellsworth. I didn't trust my voice. The parking lot was worse. My father leaned against his truck, jaw set against the gray sky. He blocked my path to my car. "That should have stayed in the family," he said. I'd heard variations of that sentence my whole life, but never the whole thing, never out loud. I looked at him. "I am family." His face did something complicated. A flicker of something that might have been shame, buried so fast I almost missed it. Then he turned away. That was his superpower, disappearing into silence whenever something true landed too close. Derek came up beside him, hands shoved in his pockets, wearing that loose, entitled slouch he'd perfected at 16. "You don't even live here, Nora," he said. "You've been gone 14 years. As if proximity to a house was the same as loving its owners. Family is not the people who share your name. It's the people who never make you prove you belong. For as long as I could remember, everyone had spoken of the lake house as Derek's eventual birthright, the place he'd raise his kids. The inheritance everyone agreed on, without ever once asking the two people who actually owned it. My mother appeared last. And she did the most frightening thing of all. She softened, she touched my arm, her eyes went wet and careful. "We're all grieving, sweetheart. Let's talk soon when everyone's calmer." Her voice was gentle. Her grip was not. I'd spent 6 years in military logistics. You learn to read what people mean under what they say. And what my mother meant was simple. She hadn't surrendered. She'd just changed tactics. I got in my car, watched the three of them huddle in my rearview mirror, heads together, my father gesturing back toward the law office. Then I drove to the lake. I needed to see the house before they did something else. Let me tell you something about myself, because it matters for what happened next. I spent 6 years in the Army, mostly in supply logistics. Most people hear that and think clipboards and spreadsheets. They're not wrong. But a clipboard in the wrong desert means the difference between soldiers eating and soldiers going hungry. My job was simple: make sure the right supplies reached the right coordinates at the right time, and document everything. Because in that line of work, memory fails. Paper doesn't. When I got out, I didn't go home. I took a small apartment 20 minutes from the lake, took a job coordinating supply for a regional farm cooperative. Kept to myself. I told people I valued my privacy. The truth was quieter and worse. I'd grown up as the extra child, the one whose college graduation no one drove to see, the one my father once introduced to a neighbor as our house guest, and laughed like it was a joke. You learn, after enough of that, to stop reaching for people who keep their hands behind their backs. The only place I'd ever felt fully seen was that lake house. 2 elderly people who asked about my day and actually waited for the answer. My grandfather would hand me a hammer. My grandmother would hand me a warm slice of her famously terrible sourdough. They never once made me prove I belonged. After the funeral, I told myself I'd left that family behind years ago and felt nothing. The will proved I never really had. The lake house was a low cedar building my grandfather had expanded room by room over 40 years. The way some men build fortunes, he built walls and windows and a dock that stretched into the water like an invitation. I drove out the day after the reading to start sorting through their things. Because someone had to, and because I couldn't stand the idea of strangers doing it. The water was doing its evening work when I arrived, lapping against the pilings in that slow, patient rhythm I'd fallen asleep to as a child. My grandmother's roses were still climbing the porch railing, a little wild without her. I stood there a long time and let the smell of her garden undo me. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and old coffee. The wind-up clock in the hallway, my grandfather's clock, the twin of the one he'd given me for my 30th birthday, ticked on faithfully like it hadn't heard the news. I wound it the way he'd taught me when I was 9. Then I walked through every room and let myself cry. Finally, the way I hadn't been able to in front of anyone. And somewhere between his workbench and her kitchen, I made a decision. I was going to live in this house. I'd give up the apartment, move out here full-time, because presence is 9/10 of keeping anything. I started carrying boxes in from my car that same night. Halfway through my 3rd trip, I found the note on the kitchen counter. Folded once. My mother's handwriting. Slid under the door sometime while I was out. Family meeting. Sunday. Be there? Not a condolence. Not a question. An order. Left in the house of the dead. In the home that was now legally mine. I set down the box and stood very still. They weren't waiting for me to grieve. They were waiting for me to fold. I went to that Sunday meeting because avoiding it would only delay it, and because I needed to see the shape of what they were building. They held it in my parents' formal dining room, the one they used twice a year. They'd arranged it like a negotiation. My father at the head, my mother to his right, Derek across from an empty chair they'd left for me, far down the table, at the end. Aunt Patricia sat in the corner with her legal pad. They'd clearly rehearsed. My mother did the talking. She laid it out gently, reasonably, the way you explain something to a slow child. The money would be managed by the family. A portion would cover the loan she and my father had taken for her real estate venture, the one no one mentioned at holidays. A portion would help Derek and his pregnant wife with their new house. The lake house, she said, would naturally come to Derek in time for the children. The rest would be set aside. She leaned forward and reached for that soft voice again. Sign it over, Nora. Do the decent thing. There it was. The whole table looked at me. There it was. Derek with nervous greed. My mother with that wet, weaponized warmth. They expected me to fold. The old Nora would have. The house guest. The extra child. I felt the pull of it even then. The deep family training that says peace is always worth more than your own ground. I sat with it for a moment. Then I said the one thing they didn't expect. I need to read a letter first. The room went absolutely still. My mother's smile faltered. What letter? I stood up, buttoned my coat the way my father had. And I left them sitting at their pretend negotiation with their pretend plan, the air going cold behind me. The campaign started Monday. Soft at first, then hard. My phone lit up with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. An aunt I barely knew sent a long paragraph about how Grandma would have wanted the family whole. A cousin sent old photos of me as a child at the lake, captioned with crying emojis, as if nostalgia were a lever. My mother sent a Bible verse about generosity. Derek sent an ultrasound photo with one line, "Think about your nephew." None of them asked how I was. All of them assumed I was the problem to be solved. I recognized the pattern because I'd run logistics for people who applied pressure for a living. So I did what I always did when something felt off. I made a file, screenshotted every message, dated it, dropped it in a folder. Did not respond to a single one. I wasn't building a case yet. Let me be honest about that. I wasn't some chess master 10 moves ahead. I was a grieving woman who'd learned the hard way that you don't win by reacting to people who want you reacting. You win by keeping your hands still and your records clean. I made coffee. I wound the clock. I carried more of my life out to the lake house, one trip at a time. And every evening, I sat on the dock and let myself feel exactly two things at once: the loss of two people who loved me, and the slow, cold certainty that the people who shared my blood were not going to stop until someone made them. I just didn't know yet how loud they were willing to get. Aunt Patricia called on Thursday. She was a paralegal, which in my family made her something close to a general. She didn't bother with warmth. "We wanted to give you a courtesy heads up," she said, in the tone of a woman who had never given a courtesy in her life. "The family is prepared to challenge the will." I asked on what grounds. "Undue influence," she said. "Two vulnerable elderly people. One estranged granddaughter who swooped in at the end and walked away with everything. A jury sees that story very clearly." I almost laughed. I hadn't swooped in, I'd been kept out. But I knew even then that the truth and what a contest could cost were two different things. A challenge could drag on for a year. It could bleed the estate dry in legal fees. It could turn my grandparents' careful wishes into a slow, expensive war. Patricia was counting on that. She was counting on me being afraid of the process. What she didn't count on was that I had spent my entire career inside processes, and they didn't frighten me the way they frightened other people. Then she made her mistake impatient people always leak. "Look," she said, lowering her voice. "Your mother needs this settled before the bank moves on her property. So let's all be reasonable." She caught herself half a second too late. "Before the bank moves on her." I wrote it down. My mother wasn't just greedy. My mother was drowning. And drowning people don't let go, they pull you under with them. I called Mr. Ellsworth the next morning, not crying. I called him the way I'd call a supplier with a requisition list. He answered on the second ring and listened to all of it without interrupting. The undue influence threat, Patricia's slip about the bank, the Sunday meeting's fake negotiation. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Let me set your mind at ease," he said. He walked me through it slowly. The will was as solid as a will gets. He'd drafted it himself. 2 disinterested witnesses. A video of the signing. A physician's letter dated the same day confirming my grandparents understood exactly what they were doing. "An undue influence claim has to be proven," he said. "The burden falls on them, not you. They have nothing but their feelings." I asked what they could really do. "They can file," he said. "They can make noise. They can spend their own money making noise." Then he paused. "There's something else you should know." Your grandfather added a clause. A no contest provision. I asked what that meant in plain English. "It means," Mr. Ellsworth said, "that anyone who challenges this will and loses, forfeits whatever your grandparents did leave them." I sat up. "They left them something, a token," he said. 25,000 each. To your father, your mother and your brother Raymond insisted on it. He said it was a test. I wrote down every word. A test. My grandfather, dead in a field outside Knoxville, had reached forward through time and laid a small, quiet trap, baited with exactly the kind of money my family couldn't leave alone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something stranger. I felt understood. He had known them. He had known me. And he had trusted me to be patient enough to let it work. Before we hung up, I asked Mr. Ellsworth the question I'd been circling. Why me? Why not split it? Why hand one grandchild a fortune and light a fire under the whole family? He was quiet again, the way he got when he was deciding how much to say. Your grandparents talked about you a great deal, he said finally. More than you'd guess? He told me they'd noticed things. The graduation no one attended. The one my grandmother only heard about afterward and cried over. The phone calls where my father spoke about me like a problem he was tired of solving. The Thanksgiving I came home on leave, and my father called me a houseguest, and I smiled and helped with the dishes anyway. They wrote it down, Mr. Ellsworth said. Not to use against anyone. Joan kept a journal. Raymond kept letters. They wanted a record of what they'd seen, in case anyone ever claimed they hadn't seen it. I hadn't known any of that. I'd spent years believing my grandparents simply had a soft spot for me, the way you have a soft spot for a stray cat. But they'd been watching the whole time. And they'd understood the shape of my family better than I'd let myself understand it. There's the letter, too, Mr. Ellsworth reminded me. Joan's letter. You haven't read it yet, have you? I admitted I hadn't. I told him the truth, I was afraid of it. Wasn't ready to be loved on paper by two people who could no longer be hugged. Mr. Ellsworth let that sit. Read it when you can, he said gently. She wrote it for the woman you are, not the girl they tried to make you. Then he wished me a good night. The line went quiet, and the clock in the hallway ticked on. They came to the lake on a Saturday, uninvited. While I was out at the cooperative, I came back to find my father's truck in the driveway, and the two of them, Richard and Derek, walking the property like assessors. They had a tape measure. They had a phone out, taking pictures of the dock, the boathouse, the view. They'd walked straight through my grandmother's roses to get a better angle. Crushed an entire section of them into the dirt. The broken smell of rose petals hung in the air like something grieving. I parked and got out slowly. My father didn't even have the grace to look caught. Just getting a sense of the place, he said. For valuation, I asked who'd let them in. It's the family home, Nora. There it was again. That word, family, used like a key that opened any door but mine. Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept measuring. My father walked up onto the porch, my grandfather's porch. He stood there like he was already deciding what to tear down. It should have gone to family, he said for the second time. Quieter now, almost to himself, like a prayer he'd worn smooth. I told them both evenly that they needed to leave. My father studied me for a moment, surprised maybe that the houseguest had a voice. Then he shrugged and walked to his truck. Derek lingered. You don't even live here, he muttered. Then he glanced at the boxes of my things stacked in the front window and flushed, because he could see that I did now. They drove off. I went inside, shaking a little. On the kitchen counter where my mother's note had been, my father had left something new. A real estate agent's business card, propped against the salt shaker like a flag planted on land they'd already decided was theirs. That night, I finally read the letter. It had been waiting in my grandmother's old Bible. The leather one she kept on her nightstand, folded once and pressed flat between the thin pages of Psalms, exactly where Mr. Ellsworth said she'd tucked it. Her handwriting had gone shaky in her last years, but it was unmistakably hers, the same loops that had signed my birthday cards for 35 years. I sat on the edge of her bed and read it by the lamp. The smell of crushed roses drifted in through the open window. The clock ticked down the hall. She didn't waste words. She told me she loved me. Then she told me why she trusted me, and the why was a list of small things I'd forgotten I'd done. You fixed the dock the summer you were 14, she wrote. By yourself. In 2 days. And you never once told anyone or asked for thanks. She wrote about how I sent them a card every single Christmas, wherever the army had me. Even the years no one else remembered their anniversary. You are the only one who never asked us for a thing, she wrote. That is how we knew. And then, near the bottom, the line that reached into my chest and stayed there. Use it the way we'd be proud of. You'll know what that means. Don't let anyone tell you that family is the people who share your name. Family is the people who would never make you prove you belong. I read it 3 times. The first time, I cried. The second time, I understood it. The third time, I felt something settle in me, hard and clear, like a load finding its center on a truck bed. They hadn't left me a fortune. They'd left me a charge. And whatever I decided to do with $37 million, I knew now it was not going to be handed over to people who had walked through her roses to measure the view. I folded the letter, put it back in Psalms, turned off the lamp. The next week, Mr. Ellsworth and I sat in his office and walked the whole road ahead, step by step, the way I used to brief a supply route. He laid out probate like a map. The will would be filed and validated by the court. As sole heir, I'd be required to notify the other potential heirs, which meant my family would get official notice, whether they liked it or not. The estate would settle in stages, on the court schedule, not mine and not theirs. His office clock ticked while he talked. I found it steadying. The process, I realized, was going to take exactly as long as it took. No amount of shouting from my family could speed it up or stop it. That was the thing they didn't understand about people like me. They thought patience was weakness. I'd learned that patience, applied correctly, is a weapon that never tires. I asked Mr. Ellsworth the only question that mattered. If they file their challenge, what should I do? Nothing dramatic, he said. You defend the will which defends itself, and you let the no contest clause do its quiet work. I thought about it. If I begged them not to file, they would file. If I tried to buy peace by handing over a slice, I'd betray my grandmother's letter and teach my family that pressure worked. But if I simply stood still on solid legal ground and let them charge at the wall my grandfather built, they would break themselves against it and forfeit even the token he'd left them. So I don't fight them, I said slowly. I just have to be as patient as the law is. Mr. Ellsworth almost smiled. Your grandfather said something very close to that. The day he signed, they filed 12 days later. Patricia drafted it, my mother pushed it forward, and my father signed his name to a petition claiming that his own parents had been manipulated by their granddaughter into betraying their only son. I got the notice the same day Mr. Ellsworth did. I read it standing at the kitchen counter. I felt a strange, sad calm. They had done it. They had walked straight into the wall, certain it was a door. The petition was full of words like isolation and vulnerability and suspicious timing, none of which would survive contact with a video of two clear-eyed people signing in a lawyer's office while a physician stood by. But they didn't know about the video, and they didn't understand the clause. That afternoon, my mother sent me a message, the softest one yet, which told me they thought the filing had given them leverage. We don't want this to get ugly, she wrote. Sign it over and we'll drop everything. We can all move on. Sign it over, do the decent thing. The same sentence, dressed for a different season. I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to Mr. Ellsworth, dated it, added it to the file. Patience, applied correctly, is a weapon that never tires. Let me be clear, I felt no joy in this. These weren't strangers. The man who'd signed that petition had carried me on his shoulders when I was small, before he decided I was a disappointment. The woman texting me about not getting ugly had braided my hair for school pictures, but they'd made their choice with open eyes. And the law wasn't going to make an exception for the fact that we shared a Thanksgiving table. I poured a cup of coffee, wound the clock, and waited. My mother came to the lake alone 3 days after the filing. Near dusk. I almost didn't recognize her. The careful warmth was gone. What was left was a tired woman in a coat too thin for the wind off the water. She didn't knock so much as appear on the porch. When I opened the door, her face was doing something I'd never seen it do. It was afraid. Can I sit? She said. We sat on the porch steps, not touching. The crushed roses, what remained of them, gave off a bruised, sweet smell between us. And she told me the truth. Finally. The whole shape of it. The real estate venture had failed. She'd borrowed against her own house to fund it. Certain the inheritance would cover the gap. The bank was moving to foreclose. I'm going to lose everything, Nora. Her voice cracked on the last word in a way that no performance could fake. For a moment, I didn't see a villain. I saw a frightened woman who had bet her entire future on money that was never hers, and lost. I felt the old pull hard, the one that says, fix it, make peace, give them what they want, and the fear will stop. I let myself feel it, then I let it pass. I'm sorry you're scared, I said. I mean that. I'm not signing the house away. But sit here and let's talk about what real help could look like. For 1 second, her eyes flickered with something like hope. Then she heard the part she didn't want. The part where I kept my ground, and her face hardened back into the mother I knew. "You always did think you were better than us," she said. Then she stood up and walked to her car. 3 days later, the moving truck showed up. But before the truck, I need to tell you what I decided, because the decision is the whole point of this story more than any reveal. After my mother drove off that night, I sat on the dock until the stars came out. I read my grandmother's letter again from memory. "Use it the way we'd be proud of, you'll know what that means." And I did know. I'd known maybe since the first time Mr. Ellsworth said the number out loud. I thought about the dock, the bread, the two people who never once made me prove I belonged. I wasn't going to hoard $37 million, and I was certainly not going to hand it to people who would burn it, clearing a bad loan and buying a bigger house. I was going to do the thing my grandparents had hinted at in every quiet kindness of their lives. I was going to build something. A foundation. A fund for veterans coming home to a town that didn't always know what to do with them. For the older folks in that town who couldn't fix their own roofs anymore. For kids like the one I'd been, who needed one place where someone waited for the answer when they asked how your day was. I would keep the lake house not as a trophy but as a home. My grandparents' porch would belong to the whole community they'd loved quietly for 60 years. I made the decision on that dock. I felt my grandfather's clock ticking faintly through the open window, counting it true. If my family wanted to know what I would do with $37 million, they were about to find out. So was the whole town. I didn't wait for my family to make their next move. I made mine first. The morning after my mother's visit, I called Mr. Ellsworth and told him I wanted everything locked down properly, on the record. So we did the unglamorous work that wins things. We filed the will for probate the moment the waiting period allowed. Once the court admitted the will, Mr. Ellsworth, as executor, recorded the transfer of the lake house, left to me by name, into my own name with the county, so that the question of who had the right to it stopped being a feeling anyone could argue about and became a fact stamped by a clerk. We assembled the defense file against their petition, the signing video, the 2 witnesses' statements, the physician's letter, my grandmother's journal, my grandfather's dated notes. I made copies. Then copies of the copies. I kept a clean set in a folder I could carry in one hand. I'd run supply convoys with less paperwork. Then I asked Mr. Ellsworth the question I'd been turning over since the real estate card appeared by my salt shaker. "What happens if they try to force me out of the house?" He took off his glasses. "Legally, the house is yours to hold, the will's admitted, the transfer's recorded. And either way, possession is yours while the estate settles. If they show up and try to remove you themselves, that isn't an eviction, Nora. There's no court order. There's no standing. It's trespass." I asked him to put that in writing. A clear cease and desist, ready to hand to anyone who needed reminding whose land they were standing on. He said he'd have it ready within the week. I drove back out to the lake that evening. For the first time since the crash, I slept all the way through the night. Not because I'd won anything yet. Because I'd done my part, the way my grandparents had done theirs. And now all that was left was to let people show me exactly who they were. Derek called me the night before everything came to a head. And for once, he didn't sound entitled. He sounded cornered. "Nora, please!" The word landed strange in my ear. I couldn't remember him ever using it with me. He told me what I'd already half-guessed. He and his wife had taken a loan, a real one, against the future. Because for years the whole family had told him the lake house would come to him. For the kids. Repeated at so many holidays that he'd stopped hearing it as a wish and started hearing it as a deed. He'd renovated their place. He'd put down money he didn't have on the strength of a promise that was never anyone's to make. "The baby's coming in 8 weeks, he said. "You don't even live here, Nora." But this time, the old line came out small and frightened. Not as an accusation, almost as a plea. As if reminding me I was a stranger here might make me feel guilty enough to fix his life. I felt for him. I did. He was 32 years old, and he'd built his future on a sentence other people had handed him. "Derek," I said as gently as I could, "I never promised you this house." "They did. They promised you something that was never theirs to give." He was quiet. I could hear his wife somewhere behind him. I told him there might be a path forward someday. A real one. But not like this. Not with a contest and a truck. He didn't seem to hear that part. He heard only that I wouldn't simply hand it over. The line went cold, then dead. I set the phone down. I knew then they were going to push it all the way to the wall my grandfather built. And I knew the wall would hold. I just hated that they were going to find out the hard way. The ultimatum arrived as a letter, hand-delivered. In my father's blocky engineer's print. He'd always preferred paper to conversation. It was short and certain, the way men are certain when they've never once been told no by their own family. I was to vacate the lake house by Sunday. If I did not, they would, in his words, remove you ourselves and let the court sort it out afterward. He had it backward, of course. He thought possession was 9/10 of the law, and that if they simply put my things on the lawn and moved Derek in, the courts would shrug and accept the new arrangement. He didn't understand that a recorded deed doesn't care who's sleeping in the house. You cannot evict an owner. He ended the letter the way he ended everything, with the sentence he'd worn down to a nub. It should have gone to family. Third time I'd heard it or read it. It had stopped stinging somewhere around the second. It had become almost informative. Every time he said it, he told me exactly how small his idea of family was, how it had a fence around it, and how I had always been standing on the other side of that fence in his mind, no matter how many Christmas cards I sent. I read the letter twice. I didn't feel afraid. I felt the strange clarity I used to feel before a long operation, when the planning was done, and all that remained was execution. Sunday. They'd named the day themselves. They'd told me when they were coming, and how, and with what intentions. And they had no idea they'd just handed me the one thing a logistics officer values above all others: advance notice. I didn't plan a confrontation. Let me be clear about that, because it would be easy to make myself sound like a general laying an ambush. I planned a Sunday. I planned it the way I planned everything, by working backward from the moment that mattered and making sure the right things were in the right place at the right time. First, the documents. I made a clean folder. The recorded deed with the county stamp, the will, the signing video on a drive, the physician's letter, and Mr. Ellsworth's cease and desist with my father's name already on it. Second, Mr. Ellsworth himself. I called and asked if he'd be willing to be present Sunday morning. Not as a lawyer making a scene, simply as the executor of the estate, standing where the executor had every right to stand. He said he wouldn't miss it. Third, and this is the part I thought hardest about, I called the county sheriff's office. I didn't ask them to arrest anyone. I told them the plain truth, that I was the recorded owner of a property, that family members had delivered a written threat to remove me by force on Sunday, and that I wanted a deputy present to keep the peace, because a crowd and a moving truck and a deed dispute was exactly the kind of thing that turned bad. The dispatcher took it seriously. She said a deputy would be there that was all no trap, no trick, no clever speech rehearsed in the mirror. Just the law, quietly arranged to already be standing in my driveway when my family arrived to break it. I spent Saturday night cleaning the house, winding the clock, watering what was left of my grandmother's roses. Then I made coffee for the morning, set the folder by the door, and went to bed. Sunday was coming. I intended to meet it standing up. I didn't sleep much that last night, but it wasn't fear that kept me up. It was the house. I sat out on the dock past midnight with a blanket and a cold cup of coffee. I let the place hold me one more time, before whatever Sunday was going to be. The water moved against the pilings in the dark. That same patient lapping. The sound my grandfather said could teach a person everything they needed to know about persistence if they listened long enough. The roses, what survived of them, breathed out their sweetness into the cool air. And through the open window behind me, I could just hear the clock ticking off the last hours, steady as a pulse. 3 things my grandparents had loved: the water, the flowers, the time. I'd spent my childhood summers inside all 3, without knowing they were a kind of inheritance more real than any number Mr. Ellsworth could read aloud. I thought about my grandmother's letter. I thought about my grandfather signing his quiet test 2 years before he died, trusting that one of us would have the patience to let it work. I thought about my father's fence, and which side of it I'd always stood on, and how I'd stopped, somewhere in the last few weeks, wanting to be let in. I didn't need their gate. I had a whole lake. Around 3 in the morning I went inside and lay down. The folder was by the door, the coffee was ready, and Sunday, when it came gray and still over the water, found me waiting. They came at 9 in a small convoy. The way you arrive somewhere you've already decided you own. First, my father's truck. Then a rented moving truck, the big kind, its diesel engine rattling the morning quiet. Then my mother's car. Behind it, Patricia's. And behind that, a cousin or two they'd brought along as witnesses. The way you bring witnesses when you want a thing to look official. They parked across the grass without a thought for it. My father got out first. Stood there surveying the property like a man arriving at a job site. Derek climbed down from the moving truck. Wouldn't look at the house. Wouldn't look at me. My mother came up the lawn with her chin set, the fear from the porch steps packed away somewhere, replaced by the brittle certainty of a woman with no exits left. Patricia had her legal pad. The cousins hung back by the cars, already uneasy. I was standing on my grandfather's porch with my coffee. In no particular hurry. My mother reached the bottom step and looked up at me. She went straight to the sentence, because it had worked on me my whole life. "Sign it over, Nora. Do the decent thing." My father climbed the steps past her, right up onto the porch, walking through the last living stretch of my grandmother's roses to get there, crushing them under his good Sunday shoes without a flicker of awareness. He stopped a foot from me. Used his height the way he always had. "We're done waiting," he said. "Get your things." I watched his face, ready to answer, when his eyes moved past me, toward the side of the house, toward the two people who had just stepped quietly out from around the corner where they'd been waiting. My father stopped talking. The whole front yard went still. Even the moving truck seemed to hold its breath. The first person to come around the corner was Mr. Ellsworth, in his gray Sunday suit, moving slow and certain, the estate file under his arm. The second was a uniformed deputy from the county sheriff's office, hands on his belt, in no hurry at all. My father's mouth was still half open on the end of a sentence he never finished. My mother's hand went to her chest. Patricia's pen stopped. I set my coffee down on the porch rail, picked up the folder I'd left by the door, walked down the steps to meet them on the grass, where everyone could see. I didn't raise my voice. I found you almost never need to. "This is Mr. Ellsworth, the executor of the estate," I said. "And this is Deputy Reyes from the county." I asked them both to be here. Then I handed my father the folder. He didn't take it. So I held it out until the silence made him. "That's the executor's deed to this house," I said. "Mr. Ellsworth recorded it with the county once the court admitted the will. In my name. That's the will. That's the physician's letter. And that's a video of your parents signing in Mr. Ellsworth's office with witnesses." The deputy spoke then. Easy and flat, the voice of a man who'd broken up 100 of these. "This property is legally hers, folks. There's no court order here. Any attempt to remove her or her belongings is trespass. I'll treat it that way. The truck needs to leave." But it was Mr. Ellsworth who delivered the part that took the air out of all of them. He opened the file, slid out a single page, held it up so my father could see his own signature on the petition. "When you filed your challenge," Mr. Ellsworth said, almost gently, "you walked straight into the no contest clause Raymond built into this will. If you press it and lose, and you will lose, you have no evidence and a video that buries you. You forfeit every cent he set aside for you. A judge will speak the last word on it, Richard. But you didn't put this estate in play at a hearing. You put it in play the day you signed this." My mother lunged for the page. The deputy's arm came up unhurried and stopped her cold. That was when my family came apart all at once. The way a thing comes apart when the pressure it was built on suddenly has nowhere to go. My mother started screaming about lawyers and lies, her voice cracking up into a register I'd never heard from her. All the careful warmth gone for good. My father went a deep, dangerous red, jabbed his finger at Mr. Ellsworth, at me, at the deed, sputtering about ungrateful daughters and stolen birthrights. Derek sat straight down on the porch steps, put his head in his hands. The cousins by the cars began edging back toward their vehicles. They'd signed up to witness a victory, not this. And I stood in the middle of all of it, perfectly still, holding the folder, feeling nothing I had to perform. My father turned on me last, his voice ragged. He reached for the only weapon he'd ever needed. "It should have gone to family," he shouted. "The fourth time, the last time." And in the quiet right after it, with the deputy beside me, the roses crushed under his shoes, my grandfather's clock ticking faintly through the open window, I gave him the only answer I'd been saving. "It did go to family," I said evenly. "You just could never see who that was." He had no reply. There was none to have. I told them then the thing that I think hurt worst of all. Because it was true, and because it was kind, and because kindness was the one thing they'd never expected from the houseguest. I told them I had been ready to bring them in, that I'd had a plan that would have helped my mother with real financial guidance, helped Derek stand on his own feet, honored the family in a way that would have lasted. "You could have had a sister," I told Derek, not unkindly. "Instead, you brought a truck." Mr. Ellsworth let the numbers do the rest. Because numbers were the only language my family had ever fully trusted. He laid it out plainly, standing on the grass while the deputy waited by the moving truck to make sure it left. The petition would almost certainly be dismissed. They had no evidence, and a video that buried them. The legal fees they'd already run up were theirs to pay, out of pockets that were not deep. And the no contest clause meant the $25,000 each that Raymond had left them, the small mercy he'd folded into his test, would be forfeit the moment a judge ruled against them. And every sign pointed to a judge ruling against them. They had come for $37 million. They were leaving with less than they'd walked in with. My mother heard the word foreclosure inside all of that somewhere. The fight went out of her between one breath and the next. She sat down on the bottom step, near her son. For a moment she was just the frightened woman from the porch again. "I'm going to lose the house," she said to no one. And here is the part I've thought about most in the month since. I did not gloat. I did not forgive, exactly, but I did not gloat. I crouched down near her, I said quietly, so the cousins couldn't hear, that I would not save the loan. Because saving it would only teach everyone that the truck worked. But I gave her a name, a financial counselor, a real one, and the number for a county program that helped people restructure before the bank moved. "Mercy isn't money," I told her. "But it isn't nothing either. She didn't thank me. I didn't expect her to." The deputy nodded at the truck driver. The big diesel coughed and started. And one by one my family got back in their cars and left the way they'd come. The following week, I told the whole town what $37 million was for. I did it at the community center, the small one with the bad heating where my grandmother used to run the Christmas drive. And I did it plainly, because that was how Raymond and Joan had done everything. I announced the Crane Lake Foundation. The money would not sit in an account. It would not buy me a bigger life. It would go to work. Scholarships for kids in a town that didn't have many. Roof repairs and ramps for the older folks who'd given that town 60 years and couldn't climb a ladder anymore. And most of all, a program for veterans coming home. The ones who came back to a place that loved them, but didn't always know how to reach them. The way no one had quite known how to reach me. The lake house would be the heart of it. Not a museum, not a trophy, a place with an open door, and a long table, and a porch where someone would always wait for the answer when you said, "How was your day?" Mercy isn't money. But it isn't nothing either. I hung my grandparents' photo back in the hallway, beside the clock, where Grandpa could keep his eye on the time, and Grandma could keep her eye on the roses I'd spent a weekend coaxing back to life. People came up to me after. Some had known my grandparents. Some had only heard the story, the way small towns hear stories. A few of them cried, and through all of it the old clock kept its steady, patient tick, the way it had through the crash and the reading in the truck. Counting out a future my grandparents had reached forward 2 years to make sure I would have the patience to build. They hadn't left me a fortune, they'd left me a charge. And I had finally figured out what it meant. The petition was dismissed 2 months later, a hearing that took less than an hour. My family did not contest the dismissal. There was nothing left to contest, and no money left to do it with. The no contest clause held exactly as my grandfather had designed it. The small bequests passed instead into the foundation, which felt right like the last piece of his test clicking shut. My mother lost her house that fall. I'd warned her. I'd given her the name and the number. She'd used neither, and I made my peace a long time ago with the fact that some people would rather drown holding their pride than swim toward a hand they've decided to hate. My father I haven't spoken to since the porch. I don't expect to. His fence was always going to be the thing he died behind, and I stopped trying to climb it the day I realized I had a whole lake. But Derek surprised me. 3 weeks after the baby came, a boy, he sent me a message. Not a long one. Just, "I'm sorry." I looked at it for a while. I thought about the small, frightened pleas on the phone. The way he couldn't look at the house. How 32 years old is plenty old enough to know better, and still young enough to learn. I didn't write back a paragraph. I wrote, "When you're ready to mean it, you know where the lake is." I haven't heard from him again yet, but the door is open. The way my grandmother taught me a door should be, neither locked nor flung wide, just unlatched for whoever is willing to do the work of walking through it. The foundation is real now, a board, a budget, a roof crew that stays busy. The first veteran we placed in transitional housing finished his degree this spring. I still live in the lake house. I still wind the clock. And on summer evenings, I sit out on the dock, the one my grandmother wrote about, the one I'd fixed at 14 and never told anyone, and I listen to the water move against the pilings, slow and patient. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like a houseguest anywhere. The lake is mine, and no one ever again will make me prove I belong. I learned the hard way and the lasting way that family is not the people who share your blood or your name. Family is the people who would never once make you prove you belong. And the moment you understand that, you stop knocking on doors that were always going to stay shut, and you go build a house of your own, with the door already open. If you've ever had to fight to be counted as someone's family, take this as your sign to stand quietly and firmly in your own worth. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment. And if you want more stories about boundaries, dignity, and standing your ground, make sure you're subscribed to my channel. I'll see you in the next one.